Hi guys and gals, Shane Stevenson, Director of Museum Collections and Curator here at the Buffalo Naval Park. And it is the 55th anniversary, 3 days ago, of the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. And it was June 6th, 1968. So in honor of that, he visited aboard the USS Little Rock. And if you looked at the title screen on this video, we have the one picture of him on board, and I'll show it here again. So there it is there. 25th of October, 1961. All right, and this is part of, again, remaking the Admirals Quarters. All right, so I had some signage made that when the room is fully finished, people can come in and read and look at some photos. We are working on a map of the Mediterranean, and I'm going to get a grease pencil and we're going to fill in some cool, interesting dates and ships that were part of the 6th Fleet. All right, but for this video, and it's not a conjecturous video at all, I just need to say that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the timeline of his visit. Was this visit just he was on board for 10 minutes wandering around shaking hands? He was with a few other people that I'll mention. Or was he meeting with Vice Admiral John Taylor, who was the COM 2nd Fleet at that time, and we were attached to the 2nd Fleet. So I'll give you the timeline of what was happening around that time. Unfortunately, the only thing in our records that comes close is in August 1961, Talisman, which was an onboard publication that would then go home to families, and that is August of 1961. All right, so a few months before the visit. Again, if I had a command history, there might be, there might be a sentence, there might be a paragraph as to why he was on board. So let's look at the good old trusty whiteboard. So who comes with Attorney General Robert Kennedy at the time? He's with the Chief of Naval Operations, George Anderson. Now, the Chief of Naval Operations is really the executive officer for the Secretary of the Navy. And there is no one higher than the CNO. George Anderson was also COM 6th Fleet for a few years, right until earlier in 1961 when he became CNO. Also with Attorney General was the Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. And again, as I mentioned, Vice Admiral John Taylor, COM 2nd Fleet, was he on board at the time? We may have been the flagship, even just for a short period of time, of the 2nd Fleet at that time. So if we zoom out a few months prior to this visit, in April of 1961, so 6 months prior, we have the Bay of Pigs invasion. All right, so that's U.S. forces and Democratic forces of Cuba landing and trying to overthrow Fidel Castro. As we know, that was a stain on the Kennedy presidency. Then we have October 1961, insert the visit to Little Rock. What's interesting is that we were cruising in the Atlantic at the time of the visit. So it's imagined that these three gentlemen came via helicopter. If we were at Newport right before we went to the Atlantic, so if we were at Newport, they can come visit. They could just tour a bunch of ships that were docked there and ported there, and then they would be on board for a few minutes and leave. But it is interesting that we were actually in the Atlantic at the time of their visit. So I don't know if there was a meeting. Again, I don't have more history of it. But it is interesting that about 11 days after that, the three men who visited and came on board USS Little Rock meet with President Kennedy to discuss Operation Mongoose. So could this have been a meeting with COM Second Fleet, with the CNO, Secretary of Defense, and Robert Kennedy to discuss the Navy's operational scope for Operation Mongoose? Or, again, was it just a 20-minute visit, half an hour, have a little lunch and leave? Just don't know. So they meet with the President on the 4th of November, 1961. All right, a few weeks later, Operation Mongoose is approved by the President, and what that was a series of destabilizing events that was sponsored by the military, the CIA, and again, democratic forces in Cuba. They were going to do some of that destabilizing events over the course of a year, culminating in what was the hopeful deposition of Fidel Castro in late 1962. So you can see that then, of course, all of this culminates in the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, Fidel Castro gets word, he contacts Russia, and then the rest we know as much clearer history via the 13 days in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So again, I'm not throwing conjecture here. We don't have any more records, but again, for the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Robert Kennedy, he was one of our famous visitors. And maybe I'll turn this into a series. You know, we've had a bunch of famous people on board the USS Little Rock. So a couple of interesting facts again. They were cruising the Atlantic at the time of the visit. It is Chief of Naval Operations, Secretary of Defense, and Attorney General. And it was, the whole Operation Mongoose was overseen by Robert Kennedy, and then he had a general in the Air Force overseeing the military operation, and then a CIA worker, let's see, I have his name here, William Harvey, who represented the CIA. So two prongs came out of there, military and CIA, along with the democratic forces on Cuba itself. So I just wanted to give you that little history. I wish I had more information about it, but they probably would have met here. If there was a meeting, they would have met in the Admirals Quarters here on USS Little Rock. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment. This might get a lot of interesting comments, and I look forward to reading them. I just wish I had more information on what happened while they were on board. All right, thanks so much, and subscribe, ring the bell, all that stuff, and we will see you again soon.